Michael Kinnamon. I'm the General Secretary of the National Council of Churches in the United States, which is a community of 37 communions, we call them, or denominations. The diversity of which is really quite great. Ranges from the Quakers to the Greek Orthodox. So, in fact, that diversity is part of the point. People look at us and say, I wonder what holds them together. And we then point to Jesus Christ and say that's the center. So the essence of the council is the community of the churches with one another, not an office in New York. And I try and stress that. We're not an organization that the churches join or a covenant that they've made with one another in order to live out more fully their Christian calling. I want to say one other thing about my own background, which is that my mother went to William Penn College in Oskaloosa, Iowa. She started there when I was 2 years old. So I grew up, in a sense, on that college campus and have Quaker roots in that sense. And then she did genealogical work and found that her grandmother, my great-grandmother, maiden name Fox, was from the Friends community in Pennsylvania. National Council of Churches has tried to say that this country needs to be vibrantly interfaith, that it's consistent with our Christian heritage to say that we value the witness of every neighbor no matter what their faith community is, and while we bear bold witness to Jesus Christ, we do so in ways that also lift up the humanity of the neighbor, and we need to say no as a result to everything which threatens the neighbor. This year's theme in ISNA, Loving God and Loving Neighbor, is what I spoke on yesterday in the plenary, pointing out that to say yes to the neighbor means to say no to everything which threatens the neighbor. That's a fundamental Christian principle. As a result, loving neighbor is not an act of occasional kindness. It means that if I want to express love for Muslim neighbors, I must stand with them and with you and so many others in saying no to that which threatens them, or threatens the Quran, or opposes the building of mosques, or casts suspicion on the whole of the community. National Council's tried to do that this year. We were very active in press conferences around that time. I must have done 20 interviews at the time of the Quran burning last August, early September, and tried to make them, especially with international media such as Al Jazeera, in order that a different face of Christianity would be shown in places like the Middle East. And I'll add only one other note on that. This isn't simply for the sake of Muslims. It's also for the sake of Christians. Because Christian communities in places like Egypt and Pakistan and Indonesia and India were also being targeted by extremists there who used extremism here as a pretext. So for the sake of Christians, we need to be present saying Christianity isn't like that. I'm General Secretary now for 4 years, and this is my 4th convention for ISNA. Every year they invite me to come and speak multiple times in this gathering of 30,000 or so Muslim friends who come together. Part of it is to lift up the work that we do together as National Council and ISNA, generally speaking on a range of social issues. So, for example, on torture. We think that this country has an awful track record over the last decade. There should be a commission of inquiry to reveal what in fact happened so that we don't ever replicate it in the future. We're on the same page. With regard to immigration reform, we think there needs to be some path to legal citizenship in this country for those who are in the country now undocumented, but especially in the interim time, family unification of those who have been split by our immigration policies and far more humane treatment of those who are in this country. All of that, we're on the same page. With regard to poverty relief, concern for the most vulnerable in society is a prime religious value for all the 3 Abrahamic faiths and for many others as well. So with regard to that, health care reform, on and on. So our agendas overlap. I think it would make sense to almost all of our constituencies also to say that any one of these issues is far greater than simply that it can't be addressed only by a single religious community, because they're far wider than that. It makes no sense to talk about the Christian response to climate change. Obviously, this is a global issue. It demands a response of interfaith communities. And so I'm very pleased to work with ISNA and other colleagues as well on these issues. And I want to come here today and say it. I love the peculiar people you are, so don't change, but be part of a whole, I suppose, is always the word that I would give to every one of our traditions, but especially to a tradition which has valued individual conscience and the kind of inner light which I think at its best is always the root of community, and I think that's what the Quaker heritage has also lifted up. But there have been times when that's reinforced a kind of separatism or individualism, which I think needs the broader council family in order to bear full witness. I've argued to the Philadelphia Yearly Meeting and elsewhere, to Heeding God's Call and so many of these places, that ecumenism, Christian unity, is a peace movement. The point of it is that the way we live with one another is as important as what we do or what we say for peacemaking. We continually undercut our witness to the Prince of Peace by living in unreconciled ways with one another. That's true for Christians, but it also is true for the wider interfaith community. If we would bear witness to peacemaking in this world, then we need to demonstrate it by visible acts of reconciliation. So I pray every time I come here that this might be a sign of that kind of reconciliation, that we will show to the world a different voice than the kind of polarized rhetoric of Capitol Hill or the other sorts of resorts to militarism as first option, which seem to be so much a part of our global picture. So I think of this as that kind of peacemaking activity. All of our denominations then, it seems to me, need to lift up the integration of their agenda. They all favor peacemaking. They claim they're for Christian unity. We hope they're also for interfaith relations. I want to argue those are part and parcel of a whole agenda. You don't have a peacemaking office over there and an interfaith office over here, but rather we ought to see that to be Quaker, to be disciple in my tradition, to be Greek Orthodox, whatever, is also to be engaged with the other on behalf of God's call to peace. I don't want you to think that you're somehow, you and the Mennonites and the Church of the Brethren are the only peace churches. All churches need to be peace churches. So I want you to give up the singular label of being this so that the others can claim it, so that your witness now becomes part of the witness of the whole of the church. So be who you are. And I think who you are has also favored interfaith relations, because you've not been, in that sense, had the theological concerns, I suppose, that some of the other traditions have. You've engaged more easily. So bring that kind of ease into the wider community. Don't hide your light under a bushel here, but allow that witness to inform the rest of us. What this argues for me, of course, is precisely the need then to do things together. It's a little bit counterintuitive to me that when we find decreasing resources, we then circle the wagons. No, it's precisely in times when we have decreased resources that we might be open to hear God's call to do ecumenically what we no longer can do denominationally. Youth resourcing is certainly, programming is certainly part of that. That I think we ought to find far more opportunity for being youth, young adults together, not only with other Christians, but with interfaith neighbors, because a younger generation is really going to lead us, I suspect, into an interfaith world more fully than the older generation ever can imagine.